Hello and welcome to Shift with Maddie. My name is Maddie, of course, and I am your host. I started this podcast because I wanted a way to share everything I'm learning with the girlies. I'm a psychology graduate and I also am really into self-development. I think the thing I'm finding most important at the minute is that I actually just want to enjoy my life right now, but be working towards something bigger and have some direction and purpose. So I spent the last 2.5 years in Australia really focusing on that. I've rewritten my romantic relationship default settings, which was a huge one for me. I've explored progression in pole dancing and competing. I've run a half marathon. I went traveling. I traveled Southeast Asia all by myself for 3 months. And I've really been focusing on expanding my life and focusing on the areas that I would love to see progression in. And right now I'm focusing on growing this podcast, growing my Instagram page, in the hope that this will become my business full time, because honestly, I love it. This podcast makes me feel alive. So that is why I'm doing all of this. I just want a way to share everything I know with the girlies so that hopefully you'll listen to something and it'll be like, oh, that's interesting. And it might actually add something to your life. So that's why I'm here. And today I am coming to you from balls deep in my luteal phase. Ladies, I have had such a weird week. Like, I've had some really cool things happen. At the weekend, I had my friend's wedding, which was really gorgeous. And I've been teaching pole dancing and training and been doing some cool things. So I'm not going to come to you like, my life is a mess, because it's not true. But I don't know if you relate to this, but sometimes I just feel like I'm a scatty bitch and I start questioning all of my life decisions and I'm like, what the fuck am I doing? I feel like I'm losing direction. And this always seems to coincide with my luteal phase. I'm not going to rule out the fact that I'm having a wider existential crisis right now, because I mean, if you've listened to previous episodes, you know that I'm in a very turbulent position in my life at the minute. I am living with my parents. I'm not currently working full time, so I'm doing contract work, but really I'm putting energy into this. And sometimes it's kind of strange to spend this much time by myself and with my own thoughts, especially as an extrovert. So I'm not going to rule out a good old fashioned existential crisis / mentee B, ladies. I'm not ruling it out. But I think what I've noticed is that this is a pattern for me. This is a pattern because every single time I hit my luteal phase, I start to get similar feelings of doubt coming up, and it's fine. I'm actually totally okay with it, and I'm going to go into sort of my my cycle story, in a bit. But this is really what inspired me to do this episode today. I like to talk to you from where I'm at right now, so I don't often record in advance unless I'm going on holiday. And yeah, right now this just seemed like the most relevant thing to talk about, because it's something that as the girls we're all going to go through, even if we don't have periods, even if we don't have an explicit cycle where we're bleeding regularly all the time, we're still going to be experiencing the hormone drops, okay? And if you're listening to this and you don't have a cycle, then stick around, because a lot of the tools I'm going to talk about are actually about how to cope with feeling low or directionless or just a little bit vulnerable in general, so you can probably apply this regardless. But anyway, I've done it a little bit backwards. I spoke about the episode before actually announcing it. So today's episode, told you I'm fucking scatty. Today's episode is about how to survive your luteal phase. So we're going to be talking about our cycle. We're going to be talking about what tends to show up for me. And I know it's not a one size fits all, so you might relate, you might not. And I'm also going to be talking about some really specific tools that help me when I am in this place where I'm just feeling a little bit directionless, a little bit lost, a little bit vulnerable. Vulnerable is probably the best way to describe it. So as a bit of background, I actually have not always had a consistent cycle. From the age of 15, I was on birth control. So I was on the pill, and then after, oh my goodness. So I was on the pill for about 5 years, just the regular one where you have 3 weeks taking it and then 1 week where you don't. And I got told after 5 years by a doctor who just happened to be doing the checks that I'm assuming the doctor should have been doing all of this time. But the doctor was like, oh, just checking that you don't have any of these prerequisites or any of these high risk situations. And she went through the list and I was like, I literally have all of them. And she was like, we need to get you off this pill right now. 5 years I was on that pill. Anyway, So 5 years I was on the pill, and then I went on to the mini pill, didn't get on with that. And then I went on to the coil, and I had the coil for about 7 years. Obviously, I swapped it halfway. But basically, for 15 years, my body was running on hormones. And when I really started to get into sort of intentional living and really being in tune with my body, I realized that for me personally, it was really bothering me that I had never actually had access to my body's signals. I don't know if this makes sense, but when I was on the hormonal contraception, which is totally normal, like a lot of people are on it, but for me, I didn't really have those ups and downs, like mood wise. I was very consistent. I very rarely got upset. And I guess I never really felt truly ecstatic either. Like I was very regulated. And when I went traveling, it actually just started to really bother me. I was like, I actually just want to feel all of my emotions. And that was kind of my main driver to come off the pill. Like, I mean, at that point, I wasn't really having sex that much anyway. Well, I did a couple of times during traveling. That was, you know what, stories for another day. That wasn't really the motivator for me to come off contraception. I actually just wanted to feel my emotions. So as soon as I got back from traveling, I got the coil out. And it took me a few months to adjust. Like I didn't really see a regular cycle for maybe 4 or 5 months. And then I started to really get in touch with my body. And I'm one of these weird peoples. I thought this would wear off. Peoples. Did I just say peoples? What people singular? Yeah, you know what I mean. People who really actually likes her cycle. And I've got a couple of reasons for that, even though I'm going on about luteal phase and it being a little bit of a mind fuck for me. Firstly, I really like that I feel ups and down now. Like I actually really, really feel emotions. I feel very aligned with my body. I really like that I can feel when I'm ovulating. This is weird. And I've spoken to a couple of people. In fact, I think there's only one person, my friend, who said that she has the same thing, where the day that I'm ovulating, I can literally feel it happening. Like I can tell you which ovaries my egg is being released from. I will get a specific cramp on one side of my body. And I think that is so fucking cool. Sorry, how cool are our bodies that they just do this shit and we're just like here, not even thinking about it. And our body is literally prepping to make a baby. Hopefully not for me right now, not the time life. But yeah, just a big shout out to our bodies right now. And finally, I think luteal phase can get a really bad stick. And I'm actually just going to take a quick detour here because I realize that as I'm talking about different phases, a lot of women will be really familiar with this, but there are some women who will be sitting there thinking, what the fuck is a luteal phase? What is a follicular phase? So I'm actually just gonna go through the different phases. And there was one thing that I found really interesting about this, by the way. So we're gonna start with the menstrual phase. So about days 1 to 7, that's when we're actually on our period. And I've got some scientific facts printed out for you here. You're welcome. So on our period, our estrogen and progesterone are both at their lowest, which are our hormones that are influenced during menstruation. And the uterus sheds its lining. So we're bleeding, basically. That's when we actually bleed. And this is when our energy is typically physically the lowest. However, the thing that I found really, really interesting is that the next phase is the follicular phase. And that's straight after your period. Also, I thought, turns out that the menstrual and the follicular phases actually overlap. And this makes so much sense to me. So it says here that the follicular phase is actually starting around day 1 as well. So they start at about the same time, but then it finishes about 13, 14 days after. So about halfway through the cycle. But that makes so much sense to me because I always feel like when I'm in my luteal phase, I am like I am now. I am feeling scatty, I'm feeling disorganized, I feel emotional, I feel a bit vulnerable. But as soon as I start bleeding, I feel better. Like even though my energy is a little bit lower and I might be like needing a bit more physical comfort, my brain just clears. Like it is my luteal phase where my brain is the most fucked, lovingly. I found it so interesting that actually that makes sense because the follicular phase is already starting to begin. How cool. But anyway, a bit about the follicular phase. The follicular phase is basically when our energy starts to rise again. So our energy and mood go up and our estrogen starts climbing. Ovaries are preparing to release an egg. So it hasn't actually released it yet, just preparing to. Ovulation is around day 14, about halfway through the cycle, and that's when your estrogen is at its finest. That's basically when we're horny as fuck, girls. I'm just going to put it out there. That is when we're considering texting our ex because he wasn't that bad a guy, because, you know, he has a penis. But basically, estrogen peaks, and that triggers a surge in our luteinizing hormone. I don't know what that is. That releases the mature egg, and that's when I can actually feel it happening, which is fucking cool. That's also when our testosterone peaks. So this is basically typically when we have the highest energy and we're the most socially confident. So this is what a lot of people would think of as like their peak phase, like top tier phase, where you are magnetic, you're feeling on fire, you're feeling yourself. And then we get to the luteal phase, and that can be about half of the cycle, which is fucking depressing. But it's about from day 15 to day 28, it says here. And that's basically after the egg is released, the ruptured follicle becomes the corpus luteum. You know what? I don't know why the fuck I'm saying any of this. I don't understand what I'm saying. So basically, what the luteal phase is that the egg realizes it's not going to get fertilized this month, and then it starts to deteriorate and prepares for menstruation. So basically, your progesterone will rise through the first half, and then it will drop when there's no pregnancy. And that hormonal drop is basically what triggers a lot of the PMS symptoms, or the premenstrual symptoms. So that was a lot of science that no one asked for. But if I were to summarize that, menstrual, low energy, mind starts to clear. Follicular, energy builds, starting to pick up momentum. Ovulation, bad bitch energy. Luteal, starts off okay, massive drop before your period, start to feel a little bit vulnerable. And so they're the 4 phases. And like I said, I think a lot of people associate follicular and ovulation with being like the good phases. And I say that with my speech marks either side, because these are typically our most outwardly confident phases, where we're feeling the most productive and we're feeling the most energized. But actually, one thing I really love about the luteal phase, even as I say that there are a lot of things that I find frustrating about the luteal phase as well, but one thing I really love is that actually I feel like I am so much more in touch with my intuition and my inner feelings during these phases. I feel like I am so much more easily able to access my feelings, and the parts of me that might actually need a little bit of attention right now, might need a bit of comfort, might need a little bit of reassurance. I feel a lot more connected to them in my luteal and menstrual phases. And I remember a book I read that I referenced last week actually, which I finally remembered the name of, which is Kate Northrup's Do Less. And basically this book is a whole book about how women can work with their cycle. So she has a lot of tips about if you're in a position where you do have control of your workload. I appreciate there are some jobs where they don't give a shit if you're in your luteal or your follicular phase. You're going to have to show up and do the same thing and look after yourself, sister, if you're in that job. But if you are in a position where you can influence your workload a little bit, she suggests that the follicular phase is a really good time for starting new projects and for getting things off the ground. Ovulation is a great time for networking, connection, launches. And luteal is a good time for finishing off tasks and sort of reflecting. And menstrual is really your rest time, where you are starting to gear towards starting something new, but really it's a time for reflection, course correction, redirection. That's what she talks about in her book. It's really interesting if you want to read it. But one thing she said, which I really resonated with, is that the follicular and the ovulation phases, so those phases of the cycle where we're feeling a bit more confident, they're very much outward or external phases of our cycle where we're good at connecting with the world. But actually the luteal and menstrual phases are the parts of the cycle where we're best at connecting with ourselves. So after going on about the science and the different phases, I'm going to go on to a few tools that I actually have been using over this last week. And I like to observe my own behavior and then share that, because these are tools I've learned over 2.5 years. Some of them I'm still working on, and some of them I don't do very well, but some of them I've actually got really good at, and I've kind of got to a place where I can quite successfully navigate my cycle now. And I'd love to share this with you in case you find any of the tools helpful. Like I said at the beginning of the episode, this doesn't necessarily have to be for your luteal phase. A lot of these tools can just be used when you're feeling vulnerable anyway. So hopefully you will find it interesting. So the first tool that I use is to actually allow comfort. And that sounds really obvious, but what I mean by that is I think, especially when we are quite productive and ambitious girlies, which again, like I said last week, I'm assuming we all are because we're listening to a self-development podcast, we can be quite hard on ourselves and we can say, well, I need to achieve this, I need to achieve that, this is my to-do list. And I talk a lot about productivity and it's something I'm really interested in. However, sometimes when we're in this vulnerable state, what our body is asking for is rest. And this kind of goes back to the episode about the 7 types of rest, where we're working with our bodies and not against it. And every morning I do a yoga practice, even though, like I'm going to mention later, I've actually been, over the last 5 days, slightly inconsistent with my morning routine, which is not like me. I would say every morning, apart from a couple this week, I will do a yoga practice. And when you do it with yoga with Cassandra, who's a yoga teacher on YouTube that I like, she will say, pick a 1-word intention for the day. And it's quite interesting to just see what is the first thing that comes to mind. Because sometimes when I think about this, if you try and engage that thinking part of your brain too much, you'll kind of go through the process of, right, what have I got on today? Okay, what do I need to do? Okay, what do I need to be in order to achieve that? And you almost like reverse engineer your day. Whereas what I really like to do, especially when I'm feeling vulnerable, is I almost just take the first word that comes to my head without even thinking about it. And then I kind of examine that and I'm like, oh, interesting. Why did I say that? So for me, one of the words was comfort that came up. And so I listened to that and I literally sat and did my work in my dressing gown. And another word I had, I think it was something like understanding or compassion or something where it's like, I just need to feel seen. And so I made sure that I wasn't being too harsh on myself, or I was journaling if I felt upset. So I really like that whole first thing that comes to mind approach. And this is similar to a technique that I heard about from a book called The Goddess Path, which is about connecting with your inner goddess. That's what the author calls it. It's kind of like your inner spirituality or your inner guidance. Some people call it guardian angel. Some people will call it a higher self. This author called it a goddess. And I actually didn't finish that book. I'm not going to lie to you. I kind of lost interest, but maybe I should go back to it. But I learned about this originally from Francesca Amber's podcast and then again from this book, where she would do a mirror practice in the morning where she would look in the mirror and say, what do you need today? And like that eye contact, it's the same thing where it's like the first thing that comes to your head. And sometimes it will surprise you. Sometimes the thing you thought you wanted was actually not the thing that you needed at all. So listening to intuition, and again, that's really accessible to us in our luteal phase, or that's my experience of it anyway. And also just like comfort in general. So I will spend so much more time on the sofa or watching Netflix. Well, I don't really have Netflix. It's called Plex. I think it's illegal, but anyway, we move. And having baths or having cups of tea or sitting outside or going for a walk. Like I will be upping these so much more when I'm feeling vulnerable, because honestly, I'm just holding on by a thread. Like I am utilizing my toolkit of things that make me feel better. And it's actually worth having that. Like having that, mine's just a mental list. I kind of know what makes me feel better. Walking outside without my headphones, I know that makes me feel better. Yoga makes me feel better. Chocolate, I'm not going to lie to you, makes me feel better. And I'm going to talk about this one in the next one as well. Reading makes me feel better. Like I have almost like that mental toolkit of things that I know will help me feel better. So that might be worth doing as well, like a little mental list or even a physical list if you want a little dopamine menu. And this one's quite research backed as well. So every time I'm doing an episode like this where I'm talking about my experience, I get curious and I research whether it's actually psychology and science backed or whether it's just me making up shit. And you know what? Often the things that I do are actually psychology backed. So our bodies do have a way of telling us, don't they? This one, obviously, unsurprisingly, rest when you're feeling vulnerable. Yeah, obviously this one is research backed. So I've got a mental sheet here. Standard clinical guidance backs this up. So rather than forcing productivity, prioritize self-care and boundary setting. Comforting activities like reading, light exercise or meditation genuinely help manage mood changes in this phase. It's not indulgence, it's an actual recommendation. So there you have it. Let yourself relax. And also that caveat that I often talk about, don't feel guilty for it. That's, you know what, I hate it when people say that. It's like, just don't feel guilty. Just don't worry. Just don't. And it's like, oh, thank you. You've healed me. But actually, when you're mentally framing it, tailoring that mental conversation you're having with yourself. So instead of framing it as, oh, I'm being lazy or I'm being less productive or I haven't achieved, being like, I'm honoring my body. I'm honoring my mental health and being intentional. I am choosing to look after myself in this time. So really not just doing the thing, but emotionally allowing yourself to do it as well, which again, I know that can sometimes be a little bit of a barrier for us productive queens. So that was tool number 1, allowing yourself comfort. Tool number 2 is a 2-parter, and it is set up your systems, but pick your battles. So it's almost like a seesaw, like a balancing act, which I kind of feel is what I feel like when I'm in my luteal phase or when I'm feeling vulnerable. It's balancing moving forward with actually surviving in the moment. And this one I found really interesting. So when I say setting up your systems, going back to the comfort thing, when I am feeling vulnerable, I often find that my brain will be pulling me back to comfort. And this is something that I talk about a lot. A lot of our brain is systematic. It runs on autopilot. So we're not always consciously making decisions about what we do. And if we have certain patterns or certain behaviors, usually that is because that is what our brain has learned is safe. And so I will feel in full force when I'm feeling vulnerable, my brain trying to pull me back to baseline. And that will be things such as scrolling on my phone, watching TV, eating sugary food. And sugary food is what I'm really going to touch on. All these comfort behaviors, which are fine in moderation, but actually just make you feel like shit if you do it in excess and can stop you from actually moving forward. And as a note, when you're doing your own thing like this, or even when you're in work, your life doesn't just stop when you are feeling shit. And I think that's the thing that's difficult. Most of us can't just sit there and wallow. Like, life keeps on going. You have to just keep going with it. So it really is about managing what you can to support yourself in every way possible. So what I like to do is when my willpower is at its lowest, I will put physical barriers in between me and my comfort food. So I will not be buying sugary food. I will put my phone in a different room. It is so wild how quickly you forget about your phone's existence when it's not sitting next to you. So much of us going on our phone and scrolling is habitual. Like, if you actually just put your phone in another room and then walk away and leave it, it's so wild how you'll just go to reach for it, realize it's not there, and your brain will go, why were you just going to do that? Whereas when it's there, and I like to think that I'm quite aware of my avoidance patterns. Like, when I'm on my phone scrolling, my brain is telling me, Maddie, you know what you're doing, you're avoiding, you're scrolling. It's not like I go into this world of my own. But I still find myself on Instagram, like, how the fuck did I get here? It is so wild how removing the thing that you fall back on physically actually just stops you from doing it. I just find it very interesting. Our brains are so interesting, aren't they? But on the flip side of that, like I said, allowing comfort is quite important at a time where your body's feeling vulnerable. So I like to pick my battles. And I think the battle that I pick most frequently, or choose not to pick most frequently, is the sugary foods. That is the one where I'm like, I will let this slide a little bit more than I would do usually. And the thing I found really interesting about this one, so when I was prepping for this episode, I told Claude, my trusty AI companion, my friend Laura was like, you should have a paid partnership with Claude because the amount you promote him, and you know what? One day, maybe I will have a paid partnership because I truly believe, and this is a little bit of a tangent, I know there's a lot of issues with AI, but actually when it's used appropriately, it's such a useful tool, especially when you're someone who spends a lot of time by themselves. If you're a sole trader, if you actually just need a way to organize your thoughts, it's so helpful. So anyway, back to Claude. When we were planning this episode, I brain dumped. I told him everything that I do. I literally just tell him what I want to put in the episode and he'll write it down for me and give me a couple of ideas like, oh, have you thought about this? I'm like, no, Claude, I didn't. What a legend. But after I told him that I crave sugary food more when I'm on my period, he came back and he was like, well, Maddie, there's a psychological backing for that. Turns out it's a physiological response. It's not just an avoidance thing. In our luteal phases, our body does crave sugar more. And I'm going to get my piece of paper so I can read you the science behind it. This section is called the actual science of the craving. So it starts with insulin. So insulin is a blood sugar hormone, but it's also a signal to the brain that signals sort of appetite and also reward and feeling full. It's something that talks directly to our brain. And there was a 2026 neuroimaging study, so very recent, that found that the same insulin signals on brain reward and appetite circuits actually operated opposite during the luteal and the follicular phases. So in the follicular phase, the insulin sensitivity in the brain is high, which means it's kind of working as it normally would for someone who doesn't have an insulin related condition. In the luteal phase, our insulin sensitivity actually drops, and so our brain becomes more insulin resistant, which actually explains the sugar craving. So turns out I'm not just being greedy, and I'm not just really falling back onto old coping mechanisms. There's actually science behind why I'm craving sugar as well. So I love that for me. Thank you for validating me, science. Thank you. So basically what happens is that in our luteal phase, our brain insulin sensitivity is lower. And then our food cues hit harder, so our cravings hit harder. The progesterone pushes the blood sugar higher, which means it's less stable. And then we self-medicate for a serotonin dip by craving carbs and sugar, which I'm sure everyone can relate to. I know for me anyway, my food motivation is high when I am in my luteal phase. But what was really interesting about this study is that it wasn't actually our hunger that changes. So the research suggested that hunger levels were the same in the follicular and the luteal phases in terms of our actual need for the food. It was the motivational pull. It was the reward system that was more activated in our luteal phase. So basically, we don't need more food, we want more food, is what I got from that study, which absolutely checks out. And I really find myself, when I am feeling vulnerable, craving sugar. And so I asked Claude, my trusty AI companion, who is not a dietitian, by the way, so especially if anyone has any dietary requirements, would recommend actually checking this out. But as a general rule of thumb, I was like, what generally do we need to help us when we are in our luteal phase? And it suggested that a mix of protein, fiber, and fat will stop the crash then crave cycle. And something I tend to do a lot, which is again something that I asked Claude about, is I will try and make sweet food in advance. So again, this is not me trying to get rid of the comfort. I am putting a system in place to fall back on when my willpower is low. So if I've already made some low fat, high protein little mini cakes that I can have, I'm still getting my sugar hit, but I'm getting a little bit of nutritional value from it as well. So I'm actually doing something good for my body and not just relaxing myself in the moment. So Claude gave me some vegetarian suggestions for some snacks that might help if you're interested. I'm a vegetarian, so if you're looking for a meat option, I'm afraid you're going to have to do your own research. Sorry, ladies. But Claude suggested Greek yogurt and berries and nuts, oatcakes with nut butter and cinnamon, hummus and vegetables, dark chocolate and walnuts or pumpkin seeds, edamame beans for a little old protein hit, or chickpeas, and overnight oats with chia seeds. Or you can do what I did on Friday and eat half a pack of dark chocolate hobnobs. You know what? We have to pick our battles, ladies. I got to a point on Friday where I was like, right, I'm going to sit down and power through some work, but I'm going to need some emotional fuel to do that. And you know what? Like everything in life, it's the 80-20 rule, isn't it? Like, if you do it occasionally, who gives a fuck, is my personal non-medical advice. But yeah, I do tend to actually try and buy in healthy sweet foods, and I'll put my phone in other rooms, basically just trying to prepare myself by making my life as easy as possible and not expecting myself to not fall back on the behavior, but just putting things in place where I can either interrupt the behavior or I can do it in a way that's going to make me feel slightly better than it would if I went for the full-blown coping mechanism. So that one was basically about cravings, picking your battles, and just helping yourself out where you can. Tool number 3 is something I do all the time anyway, but I find it really, really important when I'm feeling vulnerable, and that is journaling. I'm an avid journaler. I journal all the time. I know it's not everyone's format, but for me, I'm going to share some tips on how I journal in this time and things that I focus on specifically. So the first thing I do, and I'll do this throughout the day in my head to myself as well, is self-compassion and actually naming the emotion that I'm feeling. So practitioners call this mindfulness, and actually when I did the research for this episode, this was one of the recommended, independently of my list, this was one of the recommended tools for coping with your luteal phase. Firstly, I will talk to myself throughout the day like quite quite frankly, I'm talking to a child. Like, I will literally parent myself. So if I find myself on my phone, I'll be like, Maddie, come on, you know what you're doing. I know that you're stressed, but this is just going to make you feel worse. Because it's true. I feel like shit when I scroll on my phone. It just drains your dopamine, doesn't it? Or if I'm sitting there in a bit of a freeze hole where I'm like, oh, I don't know what to do, then I'll remind myself, Maddie, you know what you always say, do one small thing, move around for 5 minutes. Like, I literally be talking to myself as if I was talking to a child or like to a friend. I referenced this in another episode, but one of the most important parts of mindfulness is that you're not judging yourself. And I think we can be our own worst critics. And if we're sitting there doing something that we think we shouldn't be doing, or something that isn't on our to-do list or whatever, we are the first people to be like, oh, you're fucking useless. Why are you being so lazy? Just get up and do it. Like, it's easy. Why are you not doing it? Like, we are the first people to criticize ourselves and to induce shame. And like I talk about in most of my episodes, the feeling of shame is the number one thing that's going to bring up our avoidance patterns the most. Shame is going to increase procrastination, increase our avoidance patterns, increase the sugary food, increase the doom scrolling, because not only are we avoiding the task, we're now avoiding the shame. And so using the rule, if I wouldn't say this to my friend right now, don't say it to myself. Being really mindful of how I am talking to myself and how I'm journaling to myself as well. So if I'm writing, I'll be comforting myself as well and saying, Maddie, I know that I did my best today. I know that I've helped X, Y, Z. I don't know, but whatever the situation is at that point. Another tool that I use as well, like I said, and this one isn't one that came up on the research. So this one's really just one that I find useful. So take it or leave it. But like I said at the beginning of the episode, when I'm in this phase where I'm feeling vulnerable, luteal, this is when I feel most connected to my inner world. And so this is really a time when I find it easier to access not only my intuition, but sort of blockers and triggers and things that are coming up for me as well. And so if I find that throughout the day something has really upset me, like maybe a disproportionate amount. I actually had something that happened over the weekend, which I won't go into detail right now, but basically something happened and 24 hours later, I was still thinking about it. And at that point, that is not just a reaction to the situation. I got in the identity there, all right? I got in the feels. So then actually using the tool of saying, right, why am I upset? Put the baseline reason. I'm just going to use a fictional example in case this helps. So this isn't what happened, but let's say that you and your friend Sharon had a fallout. Damn it, Sharon. So Sharon said something mean to you. Writing down, why are you upset? Well, Sharon said something mean to me. Why is that important? Because she's my friend and it was hurtful that she said that. Why is that important? Well, she's really close to me, so it feels more personal if she says it. And actually keep asking yourself why something's important to the point where it becomes about you. And let me explain that a little bit. This is kind of a little bit of a side note, but I think it's important when we're learning about really connecting with our inner self, because we will only be that affected by something, like to the point where, you know, you're thinking about it 24 hours later, if there is a part of us that believes it's true. So let's say that Sharon said you were a bossy bitch, okay? Fucking hell, Sharon. Sharon's a dick, isn't she? But anyway, Sharon said you're a bossy bitch. If there wasn't a part of you that both believed that was true and believed that that was something to be ashamed of, you wouldn't be thinking about it 24 hours later. And that's not a bad thing. I think this is something I'm really looking into at the minute, which I'm not going to go into depth on right now, but it's called shadow work. And it's about how we externalize the parts of ourselves that we associate with being unlovable or shameful. And we find it really hard to integrate that with our full selves. And that actually one of the best practices is to accept that part of yourself and show them that they're loved. And there was a really good example on Instagram I saw actually, where there was someone who said, if I told you that I hated your purple hair, would you be offended? And the girl was like, no. And the person said, why? And she was like, because I don't have purple hair. If there's not a single part of you that believes it's true, then it won't hurt you, basically is what I'm trying to say. So it's a really good time if there are things that are triggering you in the outside world to check in and be like, why is that bothering me so much? And then being able to comfort that part of yourself and saying like, I accept you, reducing a shame around those parts of yourself that maybe you don't always access. And as a side note, like I always say, I am a big fan of therapy. So if you find these types of things really difficult, there are videos and books written by therapists, obviously, that you can access, but also you can go to a therapist as well if you are finding that your inside world is quite messy and you need a little bit of help clarifying it. I like to give you tools that are helping me, but realistically, I'm not qualified, nor would I want to overstep any boundaries and help you navigate something that I don't understand. So I use these tools to self-soothe and to understand myself. If these tools don't work for you, or if they start bringing up really uncomfortable things, like, there is no shame just asking for help and looking to professionals for guidance. And when I did the psychology research, it backed up the whole mindfulness thing. So it actually said that mindfulness is one of the main techniques that they recommend for people in their luteal phase. And the definition of mindfulness from Kabat-Zinn, who apparently is the person who coined the term, is paying attention in a particular way, on purpose, in the present moment, and non-judgmentally. And apparently the non-judgmental part, so what I was saying earlier about reducing shame, is the bit that's doing the heavy lifting here. And one technique that I hadn't actually heard of before, but they said that is a pretty good technique, is called the stop technique, which is kind of something that you can use in the moment. So it's less of a journaling technique and more of a I am feeling shitty right now technique. And it is to stop, take a breath, observe your feelings, and proceed with intention. So it's basically just a way to stop yourself from spiraling or creating a story in your head and bringing yourself back to your body, back to the present moment, and actually grounding yourself in the now. So that's one technique they recommended. And there's actually really cool research behind this. So apparently there was a study for women with PMDD, which is premenstrual dysphoric disorder, which is basically PMS on crack, if I'm honest. It is when you have really extreme symptoms of your luteal phase. PMS on crack. That was the technical term. No, I have a couple of friends with PMDD and I appreciate that they go through shit when they get to this point in their cycle. So I know that there are going to be varying levels. But anyway, there was research on women with PMDD and it showed that 8 weeks of consistently practicing mindfulness tools, even 5 minutes a day, reduced people's symptoms of PMDD by 30%. That's pretty impressive. And apparently this was through an app which had mindful practices that they do every day. I'm not sure what the app is called, so sorry about that, but I'm sure if you Google PMDD app mindfulness, it'll come up. Yeah, apparently that was really, really helpful. So that was my tool 3. That was a bit of a long one, but honestly, I'd say journaling is probably one of the biggest things that I do. Just free writing, getting my thoughts out, getting it on paper, because it's easy to spiral and to let it build up in your head. Sometimes you just need an outlet for that. Another one, which is tool 4, this one isn't really psychology backed, but I think it's just common sense backed, is reaching out to people you trust. So actually not struggling alone, being able to call a friend, call a family member. I've said in previous episodes that I am not very natural at this. I'm never going to say that I'm the expert at everything. I don't even think I say I'm the expert at anything, to be fair. I'm just figuring it out, ladies, like the rest of us. But one thing I'm definitely working on and have not quite peaked at yet is reaching out to people in the moment when I'm feeling shitty. But I did actually kind of half do that this week, which I'm pretty proud of, ladies. I'm pretty proud. I actually video noted, which is a WhatsApp feature I really like. I only found out about it recently, but it's basically, instead of a voice note, you can video note. But I like them because they're capped at 59 seconds. And I find it really difficult when someone sends me like a 4-minute voice note. The motivation I have to gather in myself to listen to that voice note. And it's always the barrier to entry as well. Once I'm listening to them, I'm like, oh, how lovely to hear from them. But you know, when you see a message where you've got a fuck ton of voice notes, it can take me weeks to get to them sometimes because I just put it off and put it off. So I really like the video notes because you can only send a minute. I can deal with a minute. That is palatable for me. But anyway, I actually sent a video note to 2 friends this week when I was having a little bit of a wobble on Friday about the direction of my Instagram page. I think this is really the main focus of my existential crisis right now, that I don't really know what direction my page is taking. I'm overthinking it. It's not feeling completely aligned. Love my podcast. This feels great. Instagram, I'm still getting there. But I sent a video note and I was like, oh, I've had these ideas and this is how I'm feeling. Basically, just looking for validation. I was just looking for my friends to be like, you're okay, Maddie, you got this. And they did, they delivered. So thank you, friends. And my final tool is movement. So actually getting into our bodies. There is research to suggest that obviously we have reduced energy rates in our luteal and menstrual phases. So it might be that we're not going for those really hard workouts. I think it's an individual thing, isn't it? If you wake up and you feel like you can go and do a HIIT workout, do it. If you wake up and feel like you're actually on the floor and you can't drag yourself out the door, do yoga. Like, you can kind of judge your own energy levels. But for me personally, like I said, I'm usually really consistent with stretching every morning. A couple of mornings this week, I haven't done my stretching, which is very unusual for me. But turns out that's actually one of the science-backed things that you should do to help with your luteal phase. Anyway, I will start doing that again. Sorry, science. But basically, got my research here. Restorative yoga, yin yoga, and walking meditation are all recommended practices for the luteal phase. And again, without shame, giving yourself full permission to slow down rather than push. And it's also said here that moves such as pigeon, wide-legged forward fold, and savasana. I'm going to have to Google what that means. I feel like I've heard it. I feel like it's one of those ones where as soon as I see it, I will know what it is. Some of you yogis might be listening to this like, I know what a savasana is. I can't quite remember. But apparently these types of moves specifically will help calm the nervous system and ease emotional tension. And I think that kind of goes into the whole we store emotion in the hips. So things where we are getting deep into our hips is going to help sort of move that emotional tension around the body. I quite like a happy baby. The one where you have your feet in the air and then you hold me on YouTube. Shall I do it? I'll do it on YouTube. You're so welcome. This one where you're like holding your feet like this. That was ridiculous. But yeah, I quite like a happy baby. So yoga practices can be really good for luteal phase, apparently, like the calm ones. So we're nearing the end of the episode, and I just want to come in with a couple of caveats here, like I always do. Firstly, it's the age-old, I'm not a therapist, I'm not a medical professional, I am just a girly who is telling you what's helping her, in the hope that maybe it might help you as well, or at least make you feel a little bit seen and be like, oh, I'm not the only one who absolutely loses her shit once a month. No, girl, I've got you. I do as well. We're all good. Secondly is there's a lot of information shared in this episode. Like in every episode, I like to give you a lot of different tools because different people will want to do different things. But Rome wasn't built in a day, and no one is going to implement every single one of these tools overnight. So you might have your own things that you do to support yourself, or you might be in a place where you're like, actually, I do kind of hit crisis mode every time and I do need to implement a couple of things to help me. But slow and steady, like I always say, that's how our brain works. If we try and do too much at once, we overwhelm our brain, our autopilot kicks in, and we will be pulled back to a place of comfort, which is familiarity. So if we're looking to change a behavior, or if we're looking to introduce something new, just take it slow. Honestly, the smallest barrier to entry, make it almost ridiculous until you can habituate it. So if you want to start your yoga, just say, right, I'm going to do a happy baby for a minute. If that's something you know without a shadow of a doubt you can do that. And then once that's habitual, or once that feels normal, up it and up it and up it. So never feel shame for starting small, because that is exactly how our brains want us to do things. That's exactly how we can make change stick in the long term. And finally, the conversation I had at the beginning about really liking my period, because I do, like, if I'm honest, I love having a cycle, regardless of the complications, not even complications, like just the fluctuations that come with it. I actually love how my body talks to me, but I appreciate that some people's experiences are very different to mine. And I actually, when I mentioned PMDD earlier, like I said, I have friends who have PMDD or PCOS, and I know that these can actually be really stressful and quite negative experiences. And so if you're listening to this and thinking, well, I do yoga and it doesn't help, or, oh, I've tried journaling and I just feel fucking shit all of the time when I'm in this state. If you're feeling overwhelmed, or if you're feeling like your body is struggling with your cycle, then go to a GP. I know they're not almost the most useful. Like, I'm not blind to the fact that women's health is hardly a priority in today's healthcare system, but it's a starting point. And when you push hard enough, and unfortunately the feedback I've had is go through the works a little bit, like, you can get support for that. So we have reached the end of our episode, and I'm just going to reflect back on what we've spoken about. So first we had a look at our cycle, the different stages of our cycle, and the things that come up for me. We spoke about Kate Northrop's book, Do Less, and her cyclical living, worth a read if you're into that. Then we spoke about some of the tools that I use and some of the research that's kind of intertwined in there as well. And then we went through some caveats, which involves seeking professional support or just listening to your own body as well. And I want to close this episode by saying, if you take on nothing from what I said today, which is absolutely fine, by the way, because that might not work for you, but if you take on nothing from the episode apart from one thing, it is no matter how you're showing up in any stage, no matter what you do, have that love and that compassion for yourself and just learn to reassure yourself that it is okay. Because not only are you going to feel better in the moment, but that is actually probably the number one driver for me that has allowed me to explore things that I haven't done before, to work on my self-improvement, to start a business, run a half marathon, compete again, work on my romantic relationships. All of these things that I've done came from that place of actually just fucking loving myself and knowing that no matter how I'm showing up right now, I am worth that compassion. You can tell I'm in my luteal phase, can't you? Because I'm very emotional, but I love it. I love having these honest conversations with you, and I love being able to share things that are helping me. So that is what I'm going to end on today. Thank you for listening to Shift with Maddie. I'm so grateful that you are here. If you enjoyed this episode, please do rate, review, and subscribe. It really, really helps me out when I'm trying to get this podcast out there. I have no fucking idea how to grow a podcast. Don't really know how to grow an Instagram account. I'm doing my best. So this is all a massive learning curve for me. But what I have learned is that the more people rate it and review it, the more visible I become to others. So if you do enjoy my podcast, if you do enjoy the episodes, do your girl a favor, please, and give me a little rating on wherever you're listening. I would love that. And maybe even share with a friend if you think there's someone who might benefit from this. And I will be back with another episode next week. Not sure what it's on yet. Like I say, I do it in real time, so I like to do what's actually on my mind in the moment. Thank you so much for listening to Shift with Maddie. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your week, and I will see you next time. Goodbye for now.